Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle the Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky. Specifically, we're looking at Dangma's open eye and if it connects to the third eye at all. The Secret Doctrine is, as I'm sure you all know, pretty dense and intricate,
Yeah,
but hopefully we can unpack some of its layers.
I think we can. Blavatsky's work is so fascinating, because it's trying to bring together science and religion and philosophy and using these ancient wisdom traditions from around the world. And she kind of lays out this idea of a secret doctrine, like a hidden body of knowledge passed down.
Okay, so let's get into it. The question we're looking at today is, focus on Dangma's open eye. Is this the third eye? So first off, where does Dangma's eye even show up in the Secret Doctrine?
Well, it's mentioned in stanza I, shloka 8, which is this passage that's describing a state of existence before the universe as we know it even came to be. It says, "Alone, the one form of existence stretched the boundless, infinite, causeless, in dreamless sleep, and life pulsated unconscious in universal space throughout that all-presence which is sensed by the opened eye of Dhamma."
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So Dangma's eye is sensing this all-presence before the universe even existed. What or who is Dangma?
Well, Dangma is a Tibetan term, and it refers to a high spiritual state. It's often connected with clairvoyance, that ability to perceive realities beyond our normal five senses.
Right, right. So someone in this state of Dangma is able to sense things that we just wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, they have access to something beyond our normal perception.
And what's interesting is that Blavatsky doesn't really define what Dangma's eye is. It's kind of left open to interpretation. Do you think that this opened eye could be talking about the third eye?
It's definitely possible. I mean, the third eye is this concept that shows up across a lot of cultures and spiritual traditions, right? Right.
Yeah.
You see it in Hinduism, Buddhism, and even some Western esoteric traditions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it's usually used as a symbol of higher perception, intuition, and spiritual awakening. A way of seeing that goes beyond the physical senses.
Right, so they both point towards this ability to kind of see a deeper reality, but Blavatsky doesn't explicitly say that they're the same thing.
Exactly. And you always have to remember that Blavatsky was a master of symbolism.
Right.
She was constantly using metaphors and allegories in her work.
Yeah, very veiled references.
Right. So to really understand what she's saying, we have to kind of dig beneath the surface. We have to decode those symbols and understand the deeper philosophical and spiritual concepts she's getting at.
Okay, so how do we even approach understanding Dangma's eye? What clues should we be looking for?
Well, one thing to think about is the context. Where does this passage about Dangma's eye appear in the Secret Doctrine? It's in the very first stanza.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like she's laying the foundation, for everything else she's going to talk about.
So she's setting the stage, introducing this idea of an eye that can perceive this all-presence even before the universe existed. It definitely points to a higher level of perception, that's for sure.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes Dangma's eye so fascinating. It suggests that there's this awareness that goes beyond what our ordinary senses can handle. It's an ability to perceive a reality that we don't normally have access to.
Right, so it's hinting at a potential that we have, like dormant within us, a capacity for expanded awareness that we can awaken if we know how.
Exactly.
So that's kind of where the journey begins, right? If Dangma's eye symbolizes this potential, the question then is, how do we cultivate that within ourselves? How do we, open our own eye and perceive this all-presence that Blavatsky's talking about?
That's a great question, and it's a question we'll definitely need to explore further.
Yeah, but before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's important to also understand the challenges of interpreting esoteric language, right?
Right.
What are some of the pitfalls that we should be aware of when we're trying to decode symbols like Dangma's eye?
Well, one of the biggest dangers is taking the language too literally.
Right,
We can't just assign a single fixed meaning to a symbol.
right.
We need to look at the context, the broader system of thought that the symbol is a part of.
So it's not about finding like a simple answer, but about going on a deeper exploration, right? Uncovering these layers of meaning.
Precisely. It's like trying to understand one piece of a puzzle without seeing the whole picture.
Right.
You need the context, the overall framework to really get the significance of each piece. And the Secret Doctrine is a puzzle with like a lot of pieces.
That's why it's great to have you here to guide us through this labyrinth of esoteric knowledge.
I'm happy to help.
So where do we even go from here? How do we start putting this puzzle together and unlock the deeper meaning of Dangma's eye and, its connection to the third eye?
Well, one way to go deeper is to explore the idea of dreamless sleep
Okay.
that Blavatsky mentions in the passage about Dangma's eye. That might give us some clues about the nature of higher perception.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of dreamless sleep. What does it mean in, the context of Blavatsky's cosmology?
Well, it's not talking about the sleep we experience every night.
Right.
It's not about being unconscious. Instead, it's about a state of pure potentiality, the state of the universe before it manifested into all these, forms and structures that we know.
So it's like the seed of the universe. It's got all these possibilities, but it hasn't differentiated into anything specific.
Exactly. It's pure being before, duality, subject and object, time and space.
But if it's pure potentiality, how can anything be perceived in dreamless sleep? How can Dangma's eye even be open, if everything is still unmanifest?
Right, and that's where the paradox is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where we start to see how Dangma's eye might be different from how we normally understand the third eye.
Okay.
The third eye is often about seeing within the world we know, like perceiving those subtle energies and hidden connections. But Dangma's eye seems to be perceiving something much more fundamental, something that comes before anything manifests at all.
So it's not about seeing more clearly in our current reality, but about accessing a level of perception that's beyond those limits altogether.
Precisely. Dangma's eye is sensing the all-presence, that underlying unity that creates everything. It's a consciousness that's awake even in the dreamless sleep, that can perceive the unmanifest source of all things.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty mind-bending concept. Are there any examples in other traditions that can maybe help us grasp this idea of a consciousness that's awake even when there's no, differentiated world?
Yeah, absolutely. Think about the concept of turiya in Hinduism, which is often translated as the fourth state of consciousness. It goes beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's a state of pure awareness. It's not affected by the fluctuation of the mind or the senses.
So it's like that background awareness that's always there, even when we're caught up in our thoughts or emotions or sensory experiences.
Exactly. And in Buddhism, you have the idea of Buddha nature, which is the potential for enlightenment that's within every being.
Okay.
It's always there, even when we're not aware of it. So these concepts kind of resonate with this idea of consciousness being awake, even in that dreamless sleep.
So it seems like a lot of spiritual traditions talk about this idea of a deeper level of awareness that we have inside, this potential to perceive beyond our normal limitations.
Exactly. And that's what Blavatsky seems to be pointing to with Dangma's eye. It's this potential within us to access a consciousness that isn't bound by time, space, or even, the universe as we know it.
So to come back to the question of whether Dangma's eye is the third eye, it sounds like the answer is more complicated than just yes or no.
Right. While both of them are related to this higher perception, Dangma's eye seems to represent a much more primordial awareness, something that comes before the universe differentiates into those realms that we usually associate with the third eye.
So instead of saying Dangma's eye is the third eye, maybe it's better to see it as like a precursor to the third eye, or even a potential that the third eye can help us access.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. And it leads us back to that important question. How do we cultivate that potential within ourselves?
Right.
How do we actually awaken to this level of perception that Dangma's eye symbolizes?
That's the big question, right? Where do we even start?
Well, Blavatsky herself was a big believer in various practices that could help us expand our consciousness and refine our perception.
Right.
In The Secret Doctrine, she talks about things like meditation, study, and ethical living, all as paths to spiritual growth.
So it's not just about passively reading or thinking about these ideas.
No.
It's about taking action and doing things that can transform our internal state.
Exactly. And as we do these practices, as we work on refining our awareness, we start to perceive the world in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
We might see connections we didn't notice before, or sense those subtle energies flowing through everything, or even, glimpse the all-presence that Dangma's eye can perceive.
Yeah, that brings us to another interesting part of this passage about Dangma's eye. The mention of all presence. What exactly is Blavatsky referring to with that? It just sounds so vast and mysterious.
Right. All presence points to this idea of a reality where everything is connected and ultimately one.
Okay.
It's a state where there are no boundaries or separations, and everything is experienced as part of this unified whole.
So it's not just about being aware of everything happening in the physical world at any given time.
No.
It's about perceiving this deeper level of reality where everything is interconnected and exists simultaneously.
Exactly. It's about seeing past those illusions of separation and duality that our senses create,
Right.
you know? Recognizing the unity that binds everything together.
It's like seeing the forest instead of just individual trees,
Yeah,
or maybe even seeing the essence of the forest itself, the life force that animates everything within it.
that's a beautiful way to put it. And it's a perception that requires a shift in consciousness, moving away from this limited, ego-centered perspective and toward a more expansive, interconnected awareness.
So how do we make that shift? How do we awaken to this all-presence that Dengma's eye proceeds so effortlessly?
Well, like we said, things like meditation and mindfulness can help. They can quiet the mind and open us up to a wider reality.
Right.
But Blavatsky also emphasizes the importance of studying and contemplating these teachings,
Okay.
really wrestling with these concepts and trying to understand the deeper meaning behind the symbols and the metaphors.
So it's about engaging with it intellectually, but also letting it touch our hearts and transform how we see the world.
Exactly. Letting those ancient teachings awaken something in us, activate that potential for higher perception that Dangma's eye symbolizes.
Speaking of ancient teachings, Blavatsky describes a pretty complex cosmology in the Secret Doctrine. It's like a multi-layered universe. Does that cosmology shed any light on Dengma's eye or the concept of all presence?
It does, yeah. Understanding her cosmology can help us grasp how vast what Dangma's eye is perceiving really is.
Okay.
Blavatsky talks about these 7 worlds of Maya.
Okay.
They're like different levels of existence that interpenetrate and interact with each other. Imagine them like concentric circles, with the physical world, the one we experience with our senses, as the outermost circle.
Okay, yeah, I can picture that. So the physical world is just one layer within this sevenfold system. What are the other layers like?
Well, beyond the physicals have the astral plane.
Okay.
That's the realm of emotions, desires, and psychic energies. It's more subtle than the physical, more fluid and less fixed.
So it's where our thoughts and feelings take on a more tangible form.
You could say that, yeah. And as we move inward, we find the mental plane, the realm of thought, ideas, and archetypes. It's where the blueprints for the lower realms exist, where thoughts have creative power.
I see how they connect. The physical realm is where things manifest, but the astral and mental realms influence that manifestation. It's like this cascade of energy and information flowing down from those subtler realms to the denser ones.
Exactly. And Blavatsky even talks about realms that are even subtler than the mental plane.
Whoa, okay.
Planes of pure spirit and consciousness, realms of divine wisdom and universal love. These are the realms of the Buddhic and Atmic principles.
Wow, that's getting really mystical. How can we even, conceive of these higher realms if they're beyond our senses and even our mental grasp?
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Language and thought, those are tools that we use to navigate the lower realms. To really understand those higher realms, we need to rely on intuition, experience, and a willingness to, go beyond our usual ways of knowing.
It's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it.
Ha ha, exactly.
You can use words, but they can't capture the experience.
All right. Experiencing these higher realms requires an inner transformation of consciousness, expanding our awareness beyond that limited, ego-centered perspective.
So how do these 7 worlds of Maya relate to Dangma's eye and all presence?
Remember that passage about Dangma's eye? It describes a state before the universe differentiated into these 7 planes. Dangma's eye is perceiving something that comes before these layers of reality.
So it's seeing the source, the underlying unity from which these different realms emerge.
Exactly. Dangma's eye perceives the all-presence that exists before it manifests into all these different levels of existence. It's seeing the forest, the trees, the roots, the soil, the essence of life itself, all as part of a unified whole.
That is an incredibly expansive perspective. It makes our everyday awareness seem, well, very limited. But if that level of perception is even possible, it suggests that we have this incredible potential, this capacity for awareness that we can't even grasp right now.
That's exactly what Blavatsky wanted us to see. She believed that, through study and contemplation and inner work, we could awaken to this potential in ourselves and develop our own ability to perceive the all-presence, that underlying unity of all things.
It's almost like she's challenging us to not just understand these concepts intellectually, but to actually experience them for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. The Secret Doctrine isn't just a book to read and put aside. It's an invitation to go on this journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening.
This journey seems, well, a little daunting,
Haha, it can be.
but also incredibly exciting. If Dingma's eye represents a possibility within us, then maybe we all have the potential to perceive this all-presence that Blavatsky describes.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The Secret Doctrine is really about unlocking the potential that we all have, awakening to this deeper level of consciousness and recognizing that we're connected to the source of all things.
And while we may not be able to fully understand it with our minds, we can feel it in our hearts. This longing to experience that unity, that all presence that Dangma's eye sees so clearly.
Mm-hmm. That longing is the spark of the divine within us. It's the seed of awakening. And it's a spark that Blavatsky's teachings can help to fan into a flame.
Speaking of sparks, I'm reminded of another concept that Blavatsky talks about, the idea of the spark hanging from the flame by the thread of Fohat.
Ah, yes, that's a great one. It's such a beautiful and powerful metaphor for the journey of the soul.
Okay?
And it really connects to what we've been talking about with Dangma's eye and all presence.
I'm all ears. Break down that metaphor for us. What does it all mean?
Okay, so in Blavatsky's cosmology, the spark represents the individual soul, the Atman, the divine essence that's within each of us.
So it's that part of us that's eternal, that transcends time and space, that's connected to something greater than ourselves.
Exactly. And the flame represents the universal consciousness, the Brahman, the source where all sparks come from.
Okay, so we've got the individual soul, the spark, coming from the universal consciousness, the flame. But what about that thread of Fohat that connects them? What's that all about?
Well, Fohat in Blavatsky's system is the cosmic life force, the energy that drives all creation. It's the bridge between the unmanifest and the manifest, the link between spirit and matter.
So Fohat is like the conduit, the channel that carries that divine essence from the universal consciousness to each individual soul.
Precisely. And this thread of Fohat is what keeps us connected to the source. It's the lifeline that keeps the spark alive and connected to the flame.
That's such a powerful image.
It is.
The spark, the individual soul connected to the flame, the universal consciousness, by this fine thread of Fohat, the cosmic life force. So how does this metaphor relate to Dangma's eye and the idea of all presence?
Well, think about it. Dangma's eye is perceiving all presence. The interconnectedness of everything, the unity behind all this diversity.
Right. And the metaphor of the spark in the flame shows us that we're all sparks from the same flame, all connected by the same cosmic life force.
Exactly. And that connection isn't just metaphorical. It's a real energetic connection on this deeper level of reality.
So when we awaken our own opened eye, we're not just seeing things differently. We're actually experiencing this connection more fully. We're tapping into that all-presence that Dangma's eye sees so clearly.
Precisely. And as we cultivate this awareness, as we understand these teachings more deeply, we start to see the world through a different lens. We see that divine spark in everyone, and we recognize the thread of Fohat that connects us all.
It's a big shift in perspective, one that can really change our relationships, our actions, and how we see ourselves in the universe.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from feeling separated and alone to a sense of being connected and unified.
Right.
And it starts with awakening to that spark inside of us, that potential for higher perception that Dangma's eye represents.
This has been an incredible journey so far. We've explored the passage about Dangma's opened eye, delved into its connection to the third eye, considered the concept of all presence, and unpacked this amazing metaphor of the spark, the flame, and the thread of Fohat. It's incredible how these threads weave together to create such a rich tapestry of meaning.
It's a tapestry that invites us to keep exploring, to contemplate and to discover these profound truths for ourselves. And we may not have all the answers, but the journey itself is where the real transformation happens.
Exactly. It's not about reaching some final destination, but embracing the process. Unfolding our understanding, awakening our own opened eye. And as we continue on this journey, it's important to remember that we're not alone.
Right.
We have these ancient teachings to guide us, the support of each other, and that ever-present divine spark within each of us.
Beautifully said.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to bring it back to our listener. What does all this mean for someone hearing these ideas for the first time? How can we apply this wisdom to our modern lives?
That's a really important question, and that's actually something we're going to be talking about in the next segment. How do we take these profound but sometimes abstract concepts and make them a part of our daily lives? How can we use this wisdom to face the challenges and opportunities that come our way?
Stay tuned. We're going to be discussing the practical implications of these teachings in our next segment. Welcome back to our deep dive into Dangma's opened eye. We're picking up where we left off, trying to figure out how to apply this ancient wisdom in a practical way.
Exactly. It's one thing to talk about these profound concepts, but it's another to actually integrate them into our daily lives.
Right, so how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from these abstract ideas to actually putting them into practice?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways from looking at Dengma's Eye is that how we perceive things shapes our reality. The way we see the world, what we believe, the thoughts we have, they all influence what we experience.
So it's not just about what's happening out there. It's about how we interpret it, how we react to it.
Exactly. We're not just passively watching reality unfold. We are active participants. We're co-creating our own experience. And if Dengma's Eye represents this ability to see the all-presence, how everything is connected, then if we can cultivate that kind of awareness, it could really change how we live our lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we can see how everything is connected, we're less likely to feel isolated or overwhelmed by challenges. We might even start to see solutions that we didn't see before.
Right. And it's not just about intellectually understanding those connections. It's about experiencing that interconnectedness on a deeper level, feeling a sense of belonging and unity with everything.
It's like shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, from separation to connection.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this expanded awareness, we start to respond to difficulties with more resilience and creativity. We're less likely to get stuck in those reactive patterns or limiting beliefs.
So how do we actually start cultivating this Dangma-like perception in our daily lives? Because, it's not like we're suddenly going to achieve that dreamless sleep state while we're doing the dishes or something.
Haha, right. But remember what we were talking about before? Blavatsky really emphasized things like meditation and mindfulness and ethical living as ways to grow spiritually. And those practices can help us quiet the mind, be more present, and refine our awareness.
So it's about making space in our lives for stillness, for reflection, for connection.
Exactly. And as we become more present, more aware of what's happening inside, we can start to notice the patterns of perception that are shaping our reality. We can start to see how our beliefs and assumptions are actually creating our experiences.
It's like we become observers of our own minds, watching how our thoughts are actually creating our reality. And once we see those patterns, we can start to change them.
Exactly. We can challenge those limiting beliefs, choose more empowering thoughts, and cultivate a wider, more interconnected perspective.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to see the world in a certain way. It's about becoming more aware of how we're already seeing it. And then from that awareness, we can make conscious choices about how we want to perceive and experience things.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of refinement, gradually expanding our awareness and aligning our perception with that truth of interconnectedness that Dengma's Eye represents.
It's empowering to think that we actually have the ability to change our experience like that, but also sounds like a lifelong journey. Like it's a process of constant growth and evolution.
It is, definitely. And as we start on this path, it's important to remember that we're not alone. We have the wisdom of all these ancient teachings, the support of each other, and that ever-present divine spark within us.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dangma's Open Eye, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this exploration?
I would say the most important thing is this. We all have the potential for expanded awareness. Each of us has the capacity to cultivate a perception like Dengma's, to see how everything is interconnected, and to experience the world through a lens of unity and compassion. It takes effort, it takes dedication, but the rewards are immeasurable.
Thank you so much for taking us on this fascinating journey through Dangma's Open Eye and the wisdom of the Secret Doctrine. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and I hope our listeners feel inspired to keep exploring these concepts and apply them in their own lives.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the journey of awakening is an adventure. It's a lifelong process of discovery and transformation.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. Until next time, may your journey be filled with wonder, insight, and the joy of uncovering those hidden truths that are both within you and all around you. Welcome back to our deep dive into Dangma's Open Eye and the Secret Doctrine. We've explored so much, from the symbolism of the third eye to the idea of all presence, and even Blavatsky's cosmology, those seven worlds of Maya.
It really has been quite a journey. And we also looked at that metaphor of the spark, the flame, and the thread of Fohat, which shows us how interconnected everything is. It's amazing how all of these ideas work together, to give us a clearer picture of what Dengma's Eye might be and why it matters.
Absolutely. But now I want to bring it back down to earth a little for our listeners. We've been discussing some pretty big abstract concepts, right? Higher perception, all presence, the unmanifest source of the universe. But how does all of this apply to someone living in the here and now? How can we actually use these ideas in our day-to-day lives?
That's a great question. It's easy to get caught up in the heady stuff, the intellectual side of these esoteric teachings, but their real power is in how they can change our experience of ourselves and the world.
So it's not just about gaining knowledge, it's about using that knowledge to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life. But how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from abstract concept to practical application?
I think one of the most powerful things we can take away from exploring Dangma's eye is realizing that how we see the world shapes our reality. The way we perceive things, the beliefs we hold, the thoughts we have, they all influence our experience.
So it's not just about what's happening out there objectively, it's about how we're interpreting and responding to those events.
Exactly. We're not just passively observing reality, we're actively participating in it. We're co-creating our own experience. And if Dangma's eye represents this ability to see the all-presence, how everything is interconnected, well, cultivating that kind of awareness can really change how we approach our lives.
I see what you mean. If we're able to see those connections, we're less likely to feel so isolated or so overwhelmed by challenges. We might even see solutions that we weren't able to see before.
Exactly. And it's not just about intellectually understanding those connections. It's about feeling that connection on a deeper level, experiencing that sense of belonging and unity with everything.
It's like shifting from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance, from a feeling of separation to a feeling of connection.
Precisely. And as we cultivate this broader awareness, we become more resilient and creative in how we deal with difficult situations. We're less likely to get caught up in reactive patterns or limiting beliefs.
So how can we actually start to cultivate this kind of Dangla-like perception in our everyday lives? Because, it's not like we can just suddenly achieve that state of dreamless sleep while we're making dinner or commuting to work.
Haha, right. But remember those practices that Blavatsky talked about, things like meditation and mindfulness and ethical living. These are all paths to spiritual growth, and they can help us quiet the mind, be more present, and refine our awareness.
So it's about finding space in our lives for stillness, for reflection, for connection.
Exactly. And the more present we become, the more aware of what's happening inside, the more we can see those patterns of perception that are shaping our reality. We can start to see how our beliefs and assumptions are actually creating our experiences.
It's like we become these observers of our own minds, watching how our thoughts are actually creating our reality. And once we see those patterns, we can begin to change them.
Precisely. We can challenge those limiting beliefs, choose thoughts that empower us, and cultivate a more expansive and interconnected way of seeing things.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to see the world differently. It's about becoming more aware of how we're already seeing it. And then from that awareness, we can start to make conscious choices about how we want to perceive things and how we want to experience reality.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of refinement, gradually expanding our awareness and aligning our perception with that truth of interconnectedness, that unity that Dangma's eye symbolizes.
It's empowering to think that we can actually change our experience in that way, but it also sounds like it's a lifelong journey, a constant process of growth and evolution.
It is, definitely. And as we start on this path, it's important to remember that we're not alone. We have all this ancient wisdom to guide us, the support of each other, and that ever-present divine spark within us.
That's a beautiful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dangma's Open Eye, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this exploration?
I would say the most important takeaway is this. We all have the potential for expanded awareness. Each of us has the capacity to cultivate a perception like Dangma's, to see how everything is interconnected, and to experience the world through a lens of unity and compassion. It's not always easy, it takes work and dedication, but the rewards are truly immeasurable.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating exploration of Dangma's Open Eye and the wisdom of the Secret Doctrine. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and I hope our listeners feel inspired to keep exploring these concepts and apply them in their own lives.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, this journey of awakening is an ongoing adventure. It's a lifelong process of discovery and transformation.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive. Until next time, may your journey be filled with wonder, insight, and the joy of uncovering those hidden truths that are within you and all around you.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.